of DSA, and I'm one of the co-chairs, along with Heather Hillenbrand, of the DSLC. And just briefly, you might be wondering, if you're new, what is the DSLC? The DSLC is the Democratic Socialist Labor Commission. It's DSA's national labor body. So it's a body made up of DSA members who are active in the labor movement, whether as union members and stewards, union staff, workers' center activists, union officers, labor journalists, retirees, students and labor solidarity groups, and leaders and members of local labor branches in DSA. So if you have any kind of involvement in the labor movement, you can be a DSLC member. It's a membership body, it's membership driven, and we're constantly trying to build it up in DSA and recruit new members. And I'm going to, if you're not a member yet, I'm going to drop a link in the chat. You can, as long as you're a DSA member and in some way connected to the labor movement, we want you as part of the DSLC to continue building our labor work. With that, I'll drop the link in the chat, but I'm going to hand it over to our moderator for this evening, Laura Wadlin, who Laura Wadlin is the former co-chair of Portland DSA and an officer of the American Federation of Teachers, Local 2277. So with that, I'll hand it over to the other Laura, the other labor Laura. So.
Thanks, Laura. Hi, everybody. So glad to see so many people on this call tonight. I'm so excited to welcome you to the launch of our new pamphlet on the rank and file strategy. So if you haven't seen it yet, it is at RFS for rank and file strategy, rfs.dsausa.org. So if you want to go over there to check it out, it's a beautiful pamphlet. There's a digital version and a printed version, and you can order copies, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later. So what is the rank and file strategy? Well, the rank and file strategy is a solution to two big problems we face as socialists. The first is that the level of class struggle and working class organization is very weak in this country. We are seeing a lot of bright spots, like the win of the Teamsters United slate, or the big visible strikes last year, and new unions at corporate behemoths like Starbucks and Amazon. That is so amazing, but there's still a lot of work to do to fight for socialism. And the second problem is, we socialists who know we need to advance class struggle and working class organization, we are very disconnected to where we can do that best, and that's the labor movement. And in general, there's a gap between masses of working class people and organized socialism, both politically and socially. The fact is that socialism needs a strong labor movement to win, and the labor movement needs socialists to be stronger. So the solution is for socialists to join with workplace leaders to engage in open conflict with the ruling class and build working class power. So, what do we do as socialists, and more specifically as DSA chapters? The rank and file strategy is not just one tactic, so here are a few to consider. As DSA members, we can educate other DSA members about unions and the local labor movement where we live. We can launch a jobs program for those interested in taking strategic jobs, like in healthcare or education or logistics. We can create support structures for our members in these jobs. We can support members organizing new unions in their workplaces, like holding trainings, or we could choose strategic targets to organize. We can join and build union reform caucuses to support rank and file organizing. We can build and use the Labor Notes Network. Labor Notes, an amazing organization. If you haven't heard of it, you might have heard of the conference coming up soon. We can connect with local unions and worker leaders with broader DSA campaigns like Medicare for All or Green New Deal or others. We can work with unions on electoral campaigns for DSA endorsed candidates. The rank and file strategy is so broad and so important. And the great thing is that you won't be the first to do this. Many other DSA chapters have already been leading this work, and you can learn from them. There are many case studies in the pamphlet that you can read about for inspiration and guidance on how to start these projects where you live. So after the call, head over to RFS, like rank and file strategy, rfs.dsausa.org to read it digitally or order printed copies. So now let's hear more about the rank and file strategy from our panelists. Our first panelist is Paul Prescott, a former public school teacher and current candidate for Pennsylvania State Senate. Welcome, Paul.
All right, thanks so much for having me. Thanks to DSLC for putting this event on, and it's really great to see so many people in attendance listening to this. So I'll start by kind of building on the framing that's already been laid out for this event. I think the socialist movement stands at a very interesting crossroads. DSA has grown tremendously. US politics today looks totally different than it did 10 years ago. And there are opportunities now we never could have dreamed of 10 years ago. And I'm saying this as someone that was in a socialist organization before DSA exploded. But we still face profound limits. And I deeply believe that the democratic socialist movement has to be rooted in the struggles of working people. And the struggles of working people are not only located in the labor movement, to be clear, but the labor movement is fundamental. And as of now, DSA is still too disconnected from that labor movement, though we have been making good strides. And until we forge a deeper connection, there's going to be big limits to what we can achieve politically. And DSA's success over these last 6 years has largely been rooted in electoral politics. It's hard to imagine this organization without the Bernie Sanders campaign or AOC, et cetera. And this is not an inherently bad thing. I don't think any panelists here tonight would disagree about the importance of elections, how important they are to DSA. And what I want to focus on tonight through telling some of my own story is how important our labor work is for building the kind of electoral politics that we want to see. How do we build electoral politics that is rooted in the labor movement and it's a true expression of labor's priorities? And I think this is the next stage we need to go as a left. And we need to figure out how to establish a kind of virtuous cycle between labor and electoral politics. And this is not easy. It can't happen overnight. But I think in describing some of the broader context around my current state Senate campaign, we can start thinking about how to tackle this task. So my entry into politics was through labor. I have some history in my family, background in Barbados, involved with the Barbados Labor Party. But my entry came my freshman year of college back in 2010, where I supported a local nurses strike. And I was fortunate that this first campaign was a winning campaign. And it was a very powerful, concrete example of how working people can actually stand up to corporate power and win. And this is coming off the heels of the election of Barack Obama and some disappointments around, the electoral route towards making real change. And what really transformed my perspective was going to my first Labor Notes conference in 2010. Being with thousands of savvy union activists from across the country gave me a sense of a broader movement. And I think Labor Notes is one of, if not the most important institutions on the US left. And there aren't many other places that bring working people together across sectors, across unions, with the overarching goal of figuring out how to fight the boss better and win more for working people. And that's a plug to please go to that conference this year if you can. I think it will be a really great experience. And so I became convinced that it's as a rank and file union activist that I can make the most political impact. And luckily, I'm already a history nerd, so I became a public school social studies teacher and a member of the Philadelphia Federation of Teachers. I got deeply involved with a union reform caucus called the Caucus of Working Educators. In this caucus, we fought for strong contracts. We fought against budget cuts. We worked to organize our members in a deeper way that hadn't been experienced in a very long time in the union. This is where I got my critical experience as an actual union member in the workplace, learning how to talk to anyone who is in the workplace about these issues. But DSA is also a bigger part of the story. I joined DSA in 2016 during the Bernie Sanders campaign. And of course, some of us remember the organization absolutely exploded after the election of Donald Trump. And, we came to this understanding that we needed a labor component to all this. We needed a way to bring labor militants into the organization and connect our own broader membership with the labor movement. And we used labor notes to form our first labor branch in Philadelphia. We put on a troublemaker school in 2017. So local schools for labor activists that Labor Notes puts on. And these events are a great way to identify and meet with local labor activists. And we use this as a kind of launching point to start our own labor branch. And we're also able to recruit out of this event. And, I've always seen the work of our branch as kind of having a dual role. We both want to work with labor as it exists, while also working to change it for the better. So sometimes that means working with existing union leaderships on good campaigns. Sometimes that means, working with DSA members who are looking to reform their existing unions. And so the labor branch has been a space for DSA members to strategize about how to work in their unions. It's also been a critical way for us as a chapter to build good relationships with local unions through campaigns. And, we've been over the years, reliable allies supporting picket lines. We've been building support and education among unions for Medicare for All. We worked with the postal unions during the big attacks on the Postal Service during the 2020 election. We've done labor for Bernie work during the two campaigns and many other things. And so COVID-19 was a turning point because we, I think, as the labor branch, provided a space for workers and unions dealing with workplace safety and health that didn't exist. And, this is covered a little bit in the pamphlet. We worked with local sanitation workers who reached out to us to help. They reached out to us for help as they were fighting for hazard pay and PPE. We worked with other unions to pass an Essential Worker Protection Act in Philadelphia, which is a law that is now on the books that prevents any retaliation from employers against workers who are speaking up about health and safety. And this was done, critically with the help of the DSA labor branch. And, we didn't know it at the time, but those sanitation workers who reached out to us would eventually run for union office and win, and are now in leadership of the second largest union in Philadelphia, District Council 33, representing blue collar city workers, including sanitation workers. And they would eventually host our latest troublemaker school that took place in December. And this kind of all brings me to how these relationships have played out in my current campaign for state senate. And, I'm really proud of this campaign for many reasons, but one of them is we've been able to do something that really is not common and many people thought wasn't possible. As many of you know, unions usually will back the incumbent in campaigns, especially in Democratic primaries, against an insurgent challenger like myself. There's many reasons for that. Some slightly more understandable than others we could talk about, but that's generally how these things happen. And something I thought about before running was, this is the one element we've been missing, with all the new left challengers who are all great and really through no fault of their own have not been able to start the campaign with big buy-in from labor. But in this race, they haven't been doing that. We have the endorsement so far of 8 labor unions. We're hoping to add to that list before Election Day. And this isn't the result, of me walking into a room one day and making a great speech. This is from, years of building relationships with these unions and work supporting the labor movement. And not just myself, but this is in the form of an organizational base in DSA. It couldn't be done by just one person. And it could not have happened without that groundwork. And also could not have happened without key reformers locally in the labor movement winning control of their local. 2 of my biggest endorsing unions, Teamsters Local 623, mostly representing UPS workers, and AFSCME District Council 33, have relatively new reform leaderships. And their new approach to leadership isn't just limited to how they organize their members, which is the most important thing, but it's also about how they act politically. They were willing to take a chance on someone like me because, they said, this time we're going to support someone that actually represents our interests, someone that has proven that they're going to fight for us. It doesn't matter if they're incumbent or not. And I have serious doubts that the old guard in some of these unions would have backed someone like me in this race. And so since I'm talking to you tonight as a candidate and no longer a rank and file activist, I'll end on this point. The goal of our work in unions shouldn't be to run electoral campaigns. I think the goal is to rebuild the power of the labor movement and the power of working people and start winning again. But this work, I think, has ripple effects. And I think reforming the labor movement is a prerequisite for being able to run the kinds of electoral campaigns rooted in the labor movement that we're going to need in the future. So the two have to go hand in hand. And I think our work in labor, has ripple effects well beyond than just the shop floor politically that we're going to need as a socialist movement. So I'll end there. Thanks again, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Paul. That's wonderful. I just want to let our audience know that we do have a Q&A box in this webinar. So if you have questions during the call, specifically about the rank and file strategy pamphlet or any of the themes you hear our panelists talk about, please feel free to put a question in the Q&A box, and we will hopefully have time to pitch it to our panel at the end. Okay, and on to our next panelist, we have Dalia Wilson. Dalia is the founder and co-chair of Reed College YDSA and a current member of the YDSA National Coordinating Committee. Hi, Dalia.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dalia. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a freshman in college, and I wanted to talk to you all today because I was inspired by several key strikes to become a rank and file nurse midwife, and I think you should decide to take a union job too. To give some context on to how I got here, I grew up in a liberal area that made activism part of my life at a pretty early age. In high school, I was a leader of my school's feminist club, and my experiences there, fundraising for these massive nonprofits and leading insular reading groups for the same few people over and over again, convinced me that the liberal theory of change could never really accomplish what I wanted it to. I learned about socialism on social media and spread the word to every friend that would listen, but I felt really lost and ungrounded without the ability to organize. I joined the East Bay Democratic Socialists of America, and soon after, I started a chapter of the youth section of YDSA at my high school. For background on where I was career-wise at the time, my mom worked as a certified midwife for a decade, delivering hundreds of babies at home. I grew up surrounded by her mentors and birth equipment, and I always had a sense that midwifery was something that I might want to pursue as well. The responsibility of bringing another person's life into the world was the closest conception that I really had to a calling. When I was 5, she went back to school to become a physician associate, partly motivated by the prospect of a consistent work schedule, but also deeply burned out by the atomization of working alone and mistreatment and disrespect that she was subjected to by hospitals. What made labor a real thing that I believed I could contribute to in my lifetime was attending the picket lines of the 2018 Oakland teacher strike, which East Bay DSA did strike support for. I'd read about the power that an organized workplace holds to make demands, but bearing witness to teachers, students, parents, and community members united around transformative demands and standing in opposition to this neoliberal school board was an ideal lesson in class struggle, unlike any other. A couple years later, workers at the Alameda Health System, represented by SEIU Local 10-1, went on strike and successfully ousted the Board of Trustees, which was a massive step towards deprivatizing what used to be a public system and then had become under corporate control. While I wasn't ever able to support the picket lines in person, seeing what it was like to be a militant union organizer as a nurse filled me with a sense of both duty and jealousy. That's what I was supposed to be doing with my life. I'm currently planning to become a nurse midwife. It's an exciting career on a personal level. I feel a deep connection to midwifery through my mom and the years I spent volunteering at a birth center in high school. It's also very exciting politically. Healthcare workers are on the front lines of an increasingly privatized and dystopian system and are armed with an incredibly strategic position from which to deny their labor to bosses. Obviously, there are some obstacles. I'm very, very, very early in my career. So questions of post-college education, where I'll be living, my changing interests are all impossible to know. However, I'm really grateful that I learned about the rank and file strategy when I did, because it's given me a great deal of purpose and direction in my life. I was not able to make that decision on my own, though. The greatest source of support that I had in making it was the YDSA coordinator in East Bay DSA, who worked with me one-on-one for over a year, giving me an intensive education in socialist politics and labor strategy. This mentorship was what allowed me to grow my YDSA chapter and test myself as a leader. And it was only from doing that and eventually growing confident in these tasks of organizing that I was even able to picture myself as an organizer in a workplace. To close out, no matter where you are in life, it is never too late to get a union job. I know comrades of many different ages who are taking jobs in strategic sectors with the goal of organizing, and there are job programs in many DSA chapters supporting them. However, I want to close out by talking specifically to other young people who are in a similar position to me and haven't really started a career yet. If the rank and file strategy feels like your calling, take the leap. You'll have the support of your comrades every step of the way. And there are crucial battles between labor and capital happening right now. Amazon union, anyone? Starbucks? You are the people that we need to change the landscape of labor for the better and win a socialist future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dalia. Okay, we're on to our next panelist. We're going to hear from Sean Orr, an elected steward at I think this is Teamsters Local 705, and is a member of the DSLC Steering Committee. Hi, Sean.
Hey, Laura. Good to see everybody here. Really excited for this program that we're having tonight, and what a great time for it. The class struggle is alive and well in the United States, and you love to see it. So I'd like to just start off by introducing myself a little bit. So I, like many of you, became a socialist when I was quite a bit younger and had a little bit fuller head of hair. I got started as a socialist in high school, then went to college. Didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I saw the struggles happening around me. I was born and raised up in Wisconsin. In my freshman year in college, Scott Walker decided to end collective bargaining rights for public sector workers. The Madison Uprising happened, 100,000 workers out in the street in a snowstorm out there for weeks. That radicalized a whole generation of young people up there who made a conscious decision. You know what? The labor movement's where we got to be. If we believe in these things, if we believe in fighting for a better world and fighting for socialism, then this is where we have to be. So ended up after college getting a job at a meatpacking facility for a while, and then found my way to UPS, where I am today. And I am going to talk a little bit on this call today about that practical tool that we have as DSA members to resolve these two problems that Laura started this off with, right? The two problems of the low level of class organization and class consciousness, and the separation between the socialist movement and the labor movement. Now, that tool that we have in DSA, we call it a jobs pipeline, right? So we have almost 100,000 members, right? We're the largest socialist organization in this country in decades. What do we do with that, right? What do we do with that in these conditions that Laura is referring to? One of the ways that we do that is plugging people in to key jobs in strategic industries in our local areas, to have rank and file jobs on the shop floor, preferably union, and work to win our coworkers over to socialism, to keep our own organization rooted in the working class and in that working class perspective, and revitalize the labor movement that we so desperately need here in this country. So I'm here in Chicago DSA, and we just recently established a jobs pipeline program for our chapter. What we did was we followed the amazing criteria put together by our comrades in New York City that are laid out in page 13 of this lovely pamphlet. All the more reason to pick it up. It's got a nice little step-by-step in there of what we did following New York City's method. So essentially, we asked comrades in our labor branch to think through priority workplaces or priority unions where we think DSA members should work. We open it up to anybody in the labor branch, anybody in the organization to make a proposal. And the funny thing is that a lot of the proposals actually came from workers, DSA members from their workplaces. It wasn't people thinking from the outside about, oh, it would be really great if we saw a bunch of DSA members here. It was like, no, I work here. This is what my workplace is like. This is why I think it would be beneficial to have more socialists here. This is our job in the economy. This is the service that we offer to the people of Chicago. And we had a fantastic process as we all presented these different positions, talked through the benefits, talked through the criteria, the strengths and weaknesses of different priority workplaces, right? And we ended up at the end of the day having 2 concentrations as a Chicago chapter. We're focusing on the Teamsters and we're focusing on healthcare workers. The reasons for that is, healthcare, that's a priority everywhere in the country right now. That's a huge sector in the economy, one that a lot of people depend on. Here in Chicago, that's a high union sector, right? We have multiple unions involved in organized in different hospitals in the area. And then for the Teamsters, that has a life of its own here in Chicago. Anybody that has seen The Irishman knows that there's a long storied history of the Teamsters in this city. I tell you, it's a lot better than what it's made out to be there. In Chicago, we have the largest inland port in the United States, just outside of our city. It's the only area in the whole country where all 6 railroads intersect with each other. There's hundreds of thousands of workers in this area involved in the moving of freight, in the warehousing of goods, in the delivery of goods. These are the sectors of the economy where the Teamsters predominate. And here in Chicago, there's over 100,000 of us. So it made a lot of sense for us to prioritize the Teamsters here, given those conditions. Now, we can learn that stuff, through school. We can learn that stuff through our own studies, but the best ways to really learn about priority workplaces, about strategic industries, is by engaging them as yourselves, as workers on the job. I've learned a lot more about how this city runs, about how the economy in the city works, and more importantly, how working people in Chicago relate to that economy by being a truck driver at UPS, by going out in the neighborhoods every day, by talking to my coworkers every day. You learn more than you could in any economics class, I tell you that. And the role that the comrades in our key industries played in determining this pipeline were absolutely essential. That kind of insight, the insight of having a DSA member who just happens to drive an ambulance or happens to be a CNA or happens to work in a warehouse, talking and engaging with those ideas and those experiences has helped to make this pipeline into one that is going to bear fruit for what we hope to be decades to come. Now, I just want to touch a little bit on things to keep in mind when establishing a pipeline, right? One, don't assume anything about your local area. Really go out, engage with that local economy, engage with the unions, engage with the labor movement. It's one of the best things DSA does. That strike support, that solidarity. It's not just to go out and have fun at the picket line, take some nice photos and stuff, but you go to learn, right? To talk to the workers, to learn about their working conditions, to learn about their job. That kind of knowledge goes a long way in determining where do we want our comrades to be working in what priority areas. Another thing to think about is we have strength in our numbers, right? A lot of left groups throughout history, especially in the 70s, had a habit of just throwing comrades out into workplaces on their own. And it's hard. If you are alone on a job, trying to organize, trying to win people to the struggle, trying to build something, it's very hard to do alone. One comrade in a job has the strength of 1. 3 comrades on the job have the strength of 20. So concentration is key, putting people together so they can work together, struggle together, build solidarity together. That's the way that you keep this from being a flash in the pan to being something truly substantial. And the final thing connected with that is we need success with this strategy. We don't need more martyrs. We don't want people jumping into jobs where they might not make it, right? So going back to that New York City criteria, we really want to be putting people where they're going to succeed and not just throwing them in to the meat grinder of the economy, right? But obviously, all of that depends on numbers. Having more people together in a workplace is much better than having one on their own. I could talk for quite a lot longer about the Teamsters and about all the great work we're doing here in Chicago. We led the fight here in the city for the Teamsters Unite slate. One candidate out of my local 705 took on 4 Hoffaback candidates in our city, and we beat them 2-1 in a voter turnout. And we did that by going and engaging with workers, hitting the gates early in the morning, doing what DSA does best, engaging with the working class. And so I could talk about that for hours. I'm not going to do that. But I did want to at least touch up on this jobs pipeline for everybody, because this is really the practical fundamental tool that we're all going to do to carry out this rank and file strategy. So thank you, everyone.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sean. Just a reminder to our audience, we do have a Q&A box. So if you have a question for our panelists that you'd like to see answered, we will be throwing questions to our panelists at the end. And so please don't ask your questions in the chat. Please use the Q&A box in the webinar interface. Okay, on to our next panelist. We're going to hear from Chris Izor, co-chair of Birmingham DSA. Hi, Chris.
Hello, my name is Chris Izor. I am one of the co-chairs of Birmingham DSA. And today I'm going to be talking about how strike support and just general labor solidarity action over the last year has sort of transformed the way that our chapter interacts with the labor movement and also sort of goes about our own organizing. So Birmingham DSA was incidentally next to the site of 2 big labor fights during 2021, 2022. The Bessemer Amazon warehouse Union Drive, which was about maybe 10 miles outside of our city, and the UMWA mine workers strike in Brookwood, which has just crossed 1 year on strike, which is about 40 miles outside of our city, but is sort of between Birmingham and Tuscaloosa, 2 sort of larger cities within our chapter's footprint. Much of our chapter in Birmingham is not union workers. And really, while all chapters, I think, struggled during the pandemic to keep our activity going, our chapter for many years had a strong mutual aid focus, but had not engaged much with labor organizing. So when there was the announcement that sort of took the world by surprise that worker organizers in Bessemer had begun organizing for a union and had gathered enough cards to file at this, 6,000 person fulfillment center, people, including DSA members and chapters and leaders across the country said, okay, Birmingham DSA, it's time to step up and do something, so like engage in this, thing. And we certainly knew that within our chapter as well. But again, it's not something that we had a lot of experience with, within our organizing. So we had to learn quick and helped during the Amazon campaign, sort of worked with RWDSU, who was leading the effort, to try and work with other community organizations that were there to support the union effort, to try and build up as much community support as we could. The union sort of laid out the strategy during their effort and said, we've got the contact list for the workers. If you could support, you could best support us by making sure that we get into the community, talking to as many family members, neighbors, all of that stuff of the workers. And they gave us sort of an idea of where most of the workers were. And so we began to do community canvassing, yard sign distribution, banners with supported messages that we fundraised for and put outside of the warehouse. We attended rallies and helped organize solidarity caravans during Union Drive. While we were canvassing, we intended really only to talk to neighbors in the area of Amazon, but just about 1 out of 4 doors that we knocked had somebody who was either an Amazon worker at the warehouse that was organizing, or it was somebody who had family who worked there. And so we ended up making some unexpected connections to workers through that effort. But in the meantime, we as a chapter started to build out a little bit more of our experience and our connection with labor organizers, labor activity, but also just regular workers in our area. And as the votes were starting to be counted for that first election in Bessemer, the mine workers in Brookwood, just a few miles down the road from the Bessemer warehouse, announced that they were going on strike. And our chapter, knew, well, it's time to step up once again for this labor struggle, even if we may have not felt very prepared for it. So the UMWA strike began with a very mixed reception. We had folks go to the picket line the first couple days that the strike was there, and I think it's probably not a surprise to most of the folks on the call that most of the mine workers in a sort of rural Alabama area were not necessarily super receptive to even like shiny, happy, smiling socialists, being there to support. Or maybe they didn't, some of them maybe didn't care, but the folks who were not stoked about it made it clear that they were not stoked about it. It was respectful, but we did run into some of that challenge. We also were sort of at our capacity as a chapter of roughly 100 members at the time, and so we sort of committed to, well, let's make sure that we do what we can to offer remote support. We'll boost everything that the strike puts out, and we'll sort of collect our chapter's capacity and try and keep engaged. Well, as the months went on during the strike, it was clear that the strike was going to be a long strike. They sort of had broken through the first few months. And by that point, a lot of the families who were on strike had figured out what they were going to do. And our chapter said, we need to build on the labor activity and labor support that we've done so far. So in the fall of 2021, we organized a chapter specific fundraiser. We raised a few $1,000s for the UMWA Auxiliary, which is the support organization that's made up primarily of family members of the mine workers there. They were coordinating a lot of pantry bags, diapers, kids' goods. They had a fundraiser that they had put out that we were able to support, trying to get Christmas gifts purchased for everyone. And because we were a mutual aid focused chapter for a long time, this was a natural match for our chapter. It brought in folks who were, had been doing mutual aid organizing and understood principles of mutual aid. And we were able to match that with some of the support directly to workers and their families along the way. But as we crossed into 2022, and a lot of the energy around Striketober began to, fade a little bit, our UMWA mine workers in our area were still on strike. And so working with a couple other DSA chapters, one in North Alabama, and then another in Charleston, South Carolina, we were able to organize a regional solidarity effort called DSA for the Miners, where we got in touch with every DSA chapter across the South and got responses from most of them, and organized a panel discussion with a couple of the UMWA workers, someone from the UMWA auxiliary who had been attending our DSA meetings for a few months at that point. We had a couple labor journalists who had been like very close to the UMWA strike. And surprisingly, I think to a lot of us, the international vice president of the UMWA locals joined us on the call and talked about the experience of being on the strike. And I think that was we were told afterwards that that was a very surprising gain across a very large gap in political perspective. And part of what had been said at the rallies for a few months at that point was look around at who is supporting you here. Look around at who's been here the whole time. There hadn't been a single GOP politician who had even spoken in any way about the miners' strike. As far as I'm aware, the only time that anybody has said anything was when Tommy Tuberville, our GOP senator, went out of his way to go to the Senate hearing about the strike and about Warrior Met and private equity, so that he could, frankly, shit on the workers who are there. That's the only GOP engagement with the strike so far. The Democratic Party in our state, they've had a little bit of support, but really it's been the left. It's been organized socialists who have been, trying to stay connected, stay supportive. So those are things that we've been doing with these two sort of large visible labor actions in Birmingham. But the effect on our chapter has been important. And I know that there is a question, what does the rank and file strategy mean in areas of low union density? Or, I would, sort of say a parallel within the DSA context is, how do you do, how do you get connected with, shop floor organizing, like specifically with, workers in the shop. To organize, if you are in a chapter that doesn't do a lot of labor work, when you're in an area where a lot of the, maybe the left organizing isn't focused as strongly on labor. For us, even just participating a little bit in some of these surprise labor actions have really developed our chapter structures. We have more experience canvassing than we had before. We had to figure out broader volunteer coordination than expected. We ran a Zoom webinar for the first time about political education and sharing the workers' struggle in Brookwood. We worked for the first time on inter-chapter organizing, contacting chapters across the region, building up a contact list of who is the best labor person to talk to in this chapter in Tennessee or this chapter in Louisiana. It also helped us develop some internal structures, like a dedicated labor committee that we had never had before, to focus specifically on understanding labor issues in our area. Obviously consistency, showing up for the workers on strike was important, and showing up, for us with our lower capacity didn't necessarily mean that we were able to get to the picket line each time. When they ran into court injunctions that barred any pickets during the strike, important for us was, being there and showing up was, identifying those contradictions and making everyone aware of them, boosting through all of our channels, donating to the strike fund, running our own strike fund that had DSA's name on it. So it was very clear who was, pushing for the solidarity, tapping into our DSA networks, whether it's with the DSLC, with other labor partner chapters with ours, but also, building connections with UMWA workers and their families, and Amazon worker organizers. It also, through that work, it set the stage for us to respond more directly to the call for Starbucks organizing. We have better structures in place for that. We know what it looks like to run a campaign alongside labor. And it's also been easier for us to get in touch with worker organizers and have a little bit of experience under our belt with how we can run a campaign to support those workers. And most importantly, it's helped us focus on our own workplaces as sites of struggle. So rather than our DSA membership being volunteer labor supporters. It's also helped us focus specifically on, rather than us just being volunteers, what can we do as organizers? So with United Campus Workers in particular, some of our membership has been trying to build more support from worker organizers in our areas. So with that, I think our chapter has had great success prioritizing a lot of labor struggles in our area, even when they came to us on accident. And that has helped us make a real investment in, I think, the future of our labor organizing within our chapter.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. And we're on to our last panelist before we get to questions from the audience. So now we're going to hear from Elliot Lewis, a member of the DSLC Steering Committee and a member of Teamsters Local 804 and Teamsters for a Democratic Union. Hi, Elliot.
Hi, how's it going, everyone? I'm Elliot. I'm a UPS driver here in New York City and a member of Teamsters Local 804. So I'm going to be talking a little bit more about strategic organizing and strategic industries and what it means, both on a abstract, broad level and also concretely in my experience in the logistics industry. So the basic idea, as Sean and Laura and others have said, is that we want to build a rank and file power in the labor movement and exert the most possible leverage as workers, but we only have a small group of organized socialists at the moment. So it makes sense to concentrate ourselves in jobs and industries, whereas workers will have a disproportionate amount of leverage economically and politically. So to decide, what a strategic industry is, part of that's taking into account broad economic trends. So like Sean talked about, teachers and nurses are, those are really important jobs because you can't automate them really. And they're crucial to social reproduction, to taking care of our society. So workers in those industries are in a really strong position to fight for the broader working class, both to try to reform the healthcare system and also to fight neoliberal austerity in education. Some other sectors that are important is manufacturing, of course, because that's where goods are produced. Logistics, because that's how goods are moved from where they're produced to where they're consumed. And then, it depends otherwise, often construction is really strategic in certain cities. And in many cases, new organizing can be strategic as well, as we're seeing obviously with Starbucks, in the service sector, which is a majority of US, where the majority of the US workforce works, or with Amazon, which is in, a strategic sector. And it's part of, there's an organizing drive there right now that is, has the buy-in of a bunch of different unions. So our orientation to strategic industries, is both economic, political, and then also conjunctural in terms of what's happening right now. So not only is this isn't just like an abstract idea, like, oh, maybe this would work. We can, if we actually look at, recent years, we can see that socialist organizing in strategic sectors have actually had a big impact. So, it's not a coincidence that in the teachers' strike wave of 2018, there were a lot of socialists who were leaders in that, or helping move that forward. Or that in the Chicago Teachers Union with the reform efforts there and a lot of the, really inspiring militancy and community organizing that's happened there, that socialists had a role in that. Or with UTLA or Oakland Teachers Unions. Similarly, it wasn't a coincidence, that during COVID, during this major healthcare crisis, it was often socialists who had been in, organizing as nurses for decades, who were leading the fight against, the brutal, private healthcare system and the effect that has on our society. So by being in these strategic industries, it prepares ourselves to be able to organize within the working class when these really important, fights come up that affect the entire class. So it's sort of a way of predicting, estimating where these fights and these struggles are going to break out in the future and where we want to be when those struggles do break out. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about logistics and why it's strategic and my own experience of concretely what it means to be in a strategic industry organizing. So part of the reason I got a job at UPS was because it's strategic. So I was a YDSA activist when I was in college, and I graduated, needed a job. I'd had some bad service industry jobs, so I wanted a good job that would also allow me to do strategic organizing. So I talked to some comrades, looked at the lay of the land of the economy, and saw, oh wow, logistics is a really important part of the economy. That's where all the goods are moved through. And then I also, heard that there were some really big changes happening in logistics. So the Teamsters, that has had a long time reform movement led by Teamsters for a Democratic Union, which Sean Orr talked about. which has been trying to, reform the union, make it more rank and file led, make it more militant, make it more democratic. And I knew there was a big chance for new leadership to win in the Teamsters in 2021. I also saw there was a contract campaign in 2023 to look forward to, and also saw that, with the rise of Amazon and that there was a lot of potential for new organizing and for rebuilding the labor and the logistics sector. So I considered all these abstract things, and I got the job, right? And so it's been really interesting to see over the last few years since I've had the job, how my experience organizing on the shop floor has started to connect with those broader sort of strategies and those broader theories. And it's really allowed that organizing to sort of have a broader effect. And it's sort of, made me feel like my organizing is more meaningful and plugged into a broader strategy. Like I'm not just alone, organizing in one shop. So to give a couple examples of what that's looked like, how my daily experience driving a truck, being on the shop floor, arguing with supervisors connects to these broader things I'm talking about. I'm just going to give an example of like how one sort of shop floor struggle connects to those broader big picture things. Because I think the key thing about organizing in a strategic industry is that when you are doing that sort of day-to-day organizing, it doesn't just end with a specific concrete victory in the shop floor over a small issue. Those are really important, but actually those victories start to coalesce and build and actually gain, from this broader industry that it's in, and for these broader reasons that it's strategic. And so it actually can escalate into much broader victories, which means that you as an organizer, along with other coworkers and socialists, can have a much bigger impact based off just this shop floor organizing. So one example of that is one of my first experiences of collective action was over this issue called seniority, which in a union shop is basically how much time you have on the job. And so it's about it's basically a principle of equality, and it's about power in the workplace. So that means in a lot of jobs it's like the amount of seniority you have decides who picks what job. In my job it's like who picks what route. It makes it so that management can't discriminate. They can't nitpick and make it so they can retaliate against drivers they don't like and put them on bad routes. And it means that everyone gets to pick a route depending on how much time they've had. So the person with the most time is supposed to pick first. And so it's actually in our contract that we're supposed to go in there, we're supposed to line up, we're supposed to pick our delivery routes, right, based off seniority order. But for a long time in my center where I work, they had actually just been assigning people routes in violation of the contract. So management had been using it as a tool to divide the workforce and make people afraid. So they would single out union activists and put them on the worst routes. They would take the rats and people that would do them favors and run off the routes and put them on the nicest routes. So they'd use it actually as a system of control. And so this is a classic example of where seniority is actually a matter of democratizing the workplace and making it equal. So this really felt unjust, and people were really upset about it. And once I realized that it was in our contract and they'd been violating it for 20 years, I talked to some coworkers, and I realized they were upset. And so we all organized a collective grievance about it. So some of the old timers, even some of the stewards said, oh, there's no way, no one will want to sign on to that. No, everyone's too afraid to take action. But I talked to people one-on-one, talked to the 30 drivers who involved. Then I showed up, 2 hours early one day. And sure enough, everyone was angry about it. And I had those conversations. So people signed on to this group petition about it, a whole group forum. People were translating into different languages. We handed in the petition. And by the next day, actually, they changed that system and let us pick our routes in seniority order again for the first time in 20 years. And so through that experience, it was just one small win. But then I saw suddenly all those 30 drivers, they suddenly felt really empowered because they saw that the strength that we have as workers when we take collective action. So then that small win, because we're in a strategic sector, then it suddenly started connecting to these broader things. So then I started campaigning with some of those coworkers to reform the Teamsters for the Oz election. Now some of those coworkers are involved in our Amazon organizing committee, right? So we're having, monthly meetings where we're helping UPS workers organize other Amazon workers. It's not a coincidence that some of the leaders in that Amazon work were some of the people who signed that petition and came up to me afterwards and said, I didn't really think the union meant anything before this, but now I know what it means to be a union member. Now I see the power we have in collective action. So that small action, it wasn't just that win. Now they're connected to a much broader class-wide struggle. And now we're preparing for a contract fight next year, where the president of our union, our newly reformed union, is saying that it's very likely that we're going to have to strike, right? So now we're preparing for a 300,000 person strike, which would be the biggest strike in, I don't know, 50 years or so. And the people who are going to be, the rank and file leaders in that struggle are going to be the people like my coworkers around the country who've been engaging in these micro acts of collective action that make them feel their power as workers and as union members. So that's just an example of, it's important that workers take collective action and organize in any workplace. I mean, that's 100%, an important thing, but there's only a few of us, right, as socialists. So if we can concentrate ourselves in places where those collective actions don't just end there, but they actually then empower workers to participate in broader and bigger struggles, we can have a much more outsized impact in rebuilding the labor movement and merging the socialist movement with the labor movement. And actually, some of these coworkers that I've been working with, they ended up joining DSA. And then I got more DSA members to, join me at the job, because when these struggles pick up, they gain momentum, right? People are inspired by the victories we're having. And you start to see that, that's what it means to be in a strategic industry, is that's where the class is in motion. And that's where we can do the most as organizers and as socialists to rebuild the labor movement.
Thank you so much, Elliot. All right, we are on to audience questions now. We're not going to have time for all of them, unfortunately, but we'll get to as many as we can. I'd like to throw the first question to Sean and Elliot. This question is from Maddie Grace, who asks, what can DSA members who are not in a position to change jobs start doing today to support UPS Teamsters? Are there any examples of this work happening now? Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I'll take a first stab at it and then pass it over to Elliot. But I think that, number one thing to do is for folks to get involved in their labor branch or their labor working group, because as Elliot mentioned, there's over 300,000 of us Teamsters at UPS. Our contract expires at the end of next July. We know that's happening. We know that the elected leadership of our union that we helped to get elected a few months ago, they are dead set on organizing to a strike if necessary to get the demands that we want across from this incredibly profitable corporation. So that means that not only is a year and a half from now, there potentially going to be a national labor struggle, the likes of which we haven't seen in decades, but we know it's happening. We have an organization in place, DSA, that has the best level of strike support out of any organization on the left in decades. Already exists. We have the tools there. We need to get DSA chapters need to start getting engaged now, need to start figuring out how they're going to relate to their local Teamsters to provide that solidarity and that level of community support to make the strike a success. So I would say if you don't work at UPS, you don't have to. We're going to need just as many people out in the streets with us if we walk to make sure that this strike is a success. So I would say the best thing you can do is get your labor branch active or your working group active. If you don't have one in your chapter, form one and connect with us in the DSLC, connect with your local Teamsters and build those relationships, because we're going to need them in a year.
Anything to add, Elliot?
No, I mean, I would just say, best thing you can do is get a job at UPS or Amazon, because that's where a lot of this struggling logistics is popping off right now. The second best thing you could do is, help build up that labor solidarity capacity. Just wanted to say there was a funny anecdote where the other day when I was loading my truck, the driver next to me, we're talking about some strike that was going on, and he was like, well, they should get AOC out there. Like then they'll like have so much public support and they'll win. And this guy's a Republican. He's a Trump voter. He's like, I mean, I don't agree with everything she says, but man, like she can turn up the people. She can support labor struggles. And that's just like an example of the sort of visibility and community support that DSA can provide. And I think it can go a long way in showing to workers in the labor movement like that what it means to be a socialist is to support the struggle of workers everywhere. So I think building up your labor branch is also a really important thing to do. Yeah.
Great. We had several people ask a question about how to relate to organizing with working class people where the people you're around are not socialists, and in some cases might be conservative or even hostile to socialism. I'd like to pitch this question to Chris and Paul to talk about, both to talk about workplace organizing and strike support, and even talking to community members in a campaign who, again, aren't on the same page as socialists on all the political questions necessarily. Paul, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I think, it's like any kind of relationship you build. And I think people who are already in the labor movement understand this. If you're trying to move a coworker to get involved more with the union or active on a certain issue, we're probably not going to start with saying, eat the rich, just jumping right into that. I think when it comes to this, maybe skepticism by workers who are at least currently maybe more conservative or have a certain way of thinking about socialism, I think a lot of it comes down to I kind of hyper focus on the immediate task at hand and viewing it as a long-term relationship. Whereas, if they're looking for help, a DSA chapter is giving strike support. At a certain point, if you are doing that well, that relationship is going to improve. We've had a few instances, in Pennsylvania, where I'm thinking specifically of the UAW strike in 19 or 18. Also the recent Kellogg strike out in more rural parts of Pennsylvania. We get there's definitely, there are some workers there with Trump bumper stickers, but they got along very well with us. They really appreciated the support. I don't think you can overstate how much just showing up actually really means a lot, especially if you're in a long strike. It's hard to keep up morale. Having that support is big. And that kind of was just an entry point to at least have some respect and maybe go from there. But I do think it's important kind of in the beginning stages of like being kind of more limited, I think, and focus on, what are the problems they're working on and they want to get involved in, and, develop some credibility on those and show that you actually are interested in supporting them. And kind of let the relationship grow from there. So I do think it does involve thinking about our approach strategically, what things do we make a priority, and how we speak about certain things. I do think there's thought that should go into that, if that makes sense.
I would echo everything that Paul just said. I think labor is actually I think labor is a great avenue for those conversations with people who may not even necessarily be focused on labor themselves, because you can talk very specifically about everyone's had a bad boss. Everyone's been taken advantage of. Everybody's been, called to work overtime when they didn't want to. Everybody's had their wages, small compared with anything else. And so I think, for us in Birmingham, in an area that is more conservative, I think focusing specific, being honest first and foremost. You don't have to, it's a bad technique to hide who you are, or to try and pretend like you're someone that you're not, or hide, change your views or your perspectives or how you represent yourself. But people listen to solidarity, especially over the long term. And when you're talking to if you're talking to somebody, whether it's at work or if it is somebody who you're meeting maybe on a picket line, where you're just starting to build a relationship, leading with, we're here as socialists, and here's what socialism is not necessarily as Paul said, not necessarily the most strategic way to build that connection, but focusing on specific worker issues that people are facing, while sort of being your honest and open self, is part of building a relationship over the long term. Us being socialists going to the picket line, or talking to union workers in rural Alabama, it's not a welcome reception from everybody. But if we've been there, month after month, they begin to know, maybe they don't agree with everything DSA does, but they know that we're here for the right reasons. And as the months continue to go on, people start to ask, well, what is it all about? Maybe they'll come to an event that we're hosting. Maybe if we have a conversation, they may that may open up opportunity to talk about that. So just being honest, being consistent, and knowing, as Paul suggested, that it's a really long opportunity to build those relationships is what I would recommend.
Wonderful. Thank you for the answer. I have a couple questions for Dalia. Dalia, someone is asking about the challenges of encouraging people to take strategic jobs and that part of the rank and file approach. And what are some ways to navigate those challenges, and especially regarding changing industries or encouraging other people to take those jobs?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. First of all, I want to say that like if none of the strategic like organizing sectors are something that you feel like you could do for the long term, then don't do it. Like the benefits that come from like being part of the benefits that you can get from organizing in a workplace only get stronger the longer that you're working there and the more trust you're able to build up with your coworkers. So if you're not going to like be happy in those jobs, like that's not a way to spend your life. And there's like a lot of opportunities to support the rank and file strategy and support labor organizing outside of the rank and file strategy. But I also want to say that like there's a huge diversity of what it means to be a strategic job. Like within the education sector, it's not only teaching, like school secretaries, janitorial services, other like there's so many jobs even within a single school. Within healthcare, like there's like that doesn't just mean nurses, that also includes, like I said before, like secretaries and janitorial services, delivery drivers, within logistics there's a whole plethora of what it means to work in that sector. And then additionally, like working in these sectors is not like, that doesn't necessarily mean that like your like income or your standard of living is going to be worse than if you like took a kind of more like standard like white collar job. Like being in a union has a massive amount of benefits, both for your salary, for your working conditions, for your job stability. Like these are good jobs to have on their own. So that being said, like, yeah, I think that there's a huge variety of strategic union jobs that can be really great as jobs on their own. But if it's not for you, it's not for you. And there's a lot of other ways you can support from the outside.
Great. And just one more question for you. Someone is asking if you are a leader of a YDSA chapter and your fellow members aren't in unions yet, but would like to provide support to the labor movement as community members and as socialists. What is a good way for them to do that?
Another wonderful question. Yeah, so I would say the best thing you can do is talk to people in your chapter about labor. They're at a very great point in their life where it's not too hard to go into a strategic sector and begin on your own path of the rank and file pipeline. That being said, I think if your DSA chapter nearby is doing any sort of labor organizing, then getting involved with them and supporting it that way is great. And if you're looking to run any sort of labor solidarity campaign or campus labor organizing campaign, the National YDSA is running a cohort of chapters who are also involved in labor-related campaigns to meet together every week and talk through the challenges, successes, lessons of their organizing and support each other. These cohorts run on a semesterly basis. So if you're a chapter leader, you should watch out in your email to see when the next registration for those is coming up, because they're a really, really valuable resource.
Great, thank you so much. A couple people are asking about how the rank and file strategy applies in industries where union density is low or in areas where union density is low. And so I think the question is, well, how does the rank and file strategy apply to me and my chapter if no one around me, as far as I can tell, is in a union, and most American workers are also not in unions. So would any of our panelists like to take that question? How do non-union workers and people in very, very low density areas, low union density areas fit into the rank and file strategy? Yeah, go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I can take a little stab at that. I think that obviously you got to know your local economy. There's a lot of generalities that are true everywhere in this country, and then there's particularities in each of our local areas that are true as well. And so, whichever one is more prevalent for you, I mean, obviously go for that. But, the way our economy is structured in this country, logistics is kind of a key industry no matter where you are, whether you are an endpoint for that logistics or you live somewhere like in Chicago or in a West Coast port town that is a major like nexus point of the logistics network. It's everywhere. And in that industry, obviously you have UPS, right? If wherever you live in this country, there is a UPS hub within probably like 30, 40 miles of you where Teamsters are working. They are all covered by one single contract. So whatever work you are doing there to organize, it's under pretty similar conditions to any DSA comrades at any other UPS facility anywhere in the country. So that's an easy entry point, right? But beyond that, there's a lot of other logistics industry jobs that are either Teamster covered or covered by another union in that industry. You'd be kind of surprised. And obviously, they might not be the place with the biggest amount of workers, right? But the number of workers doesn't always equal the prevalence or the strength in the economy, right? Like here in Chicago, for example, there was a strike at Cisco, which is a pretty large company that provides groceries and produce and food for restaurants, for universities, for hospitals. And here in Chicago, they're Teamsters. That's like 100 people in the warehouse, about 120 drivers. 100 warehouse workers went on strike. 120 Teamster drivers honored that picket line. Half of the restaurants in the city of Chicago ran out of food within 4 days, and the strike was resolved. So, I mean, they might not, that place isn't like, it's not like the Rouge plant for the UAW where tens of thousands of workers are there, right? We're talking about like 200 plus. But the prevalence of where they are and the strategic importance to the city's economy meant that they were able to pack an outsized impact, not only on the economy, but also on the broader labor movement, inspiring other workers, inspiring other unions to take action as they did here in Chicago. So I would say investigation is key, see what works, but if you got nothing else, you've always got UPS to fall back on.
Great. I've got another question. I might throw this to maybe Paul and Elliot. So there are a couple questions about educating our working class comrades, people we talk to in the community, and our coworkers about the labor movement, about class struggle, and the connection to issues of sexism and racism. So what is our message to working class people and in particular our coworkers and people we're involving in like a class struggle election about class struggle and how that is connected to defeating racism and sexism? Paul, do you want to start?
Yeah, trying to think where to begin with this. I think the most powerful education is really through example, and something as a union member and as a candidate, always harp on is how connected these struggles are. For example, public sector labor and racial justice. And this is something a lot of people know as well. Especially in major urban centers, a lot of stable Black middle class communities are built on public sector labor, like postal workers, city workers, things like that. So I think tapping into that kind of already existing experience and kind of highlighting how these struggles, even if they might not seem by rhetoric wise or by the sound of them, that they relate to racial justice, by showing that they do. But I think in the context of a union fight, just making it very clear through a struggle of like how bosses divide us. And, I think the ways they do it today are probably more subtle, but I think there's usually different cliques that exist within a workplace. They don't always, are not always based on race. Often they are. And I think there's subtle ways that management can use that and does use that. And I think pointing that out very clearly and overcoming that, I mean, no matter how you slice it, any good labor organizing involves trying to involve as many members as possible, talk to as many people as possible. We actually went through this process in the teachers union. Overwhelmingly the paraprofessionals in our union are African Americans and overwhelmingly underpaid, even though they're in the same union. And we kind of had realized many teachers just in organizing wouldn't talk to paraprofessionals, partly being a racial class divide, partly, different job. So we, making a point of saying like, you've got to make sure on every union committee in every building, you're including paraprofessionals, you're talking to them, you're involving them. And that kind of inherently increased the involvement of people of color in the union. So I think, in the context of being in the union, making that clear and really being deliberate about making sure you are, organizing with everyone and paying attention to some of those racial dynamics that might exist.
Anything to add, Elliot?
No, not really. I mean, I think that pretty much captures it. I think, yeah, you organize against any, explicit racism or, use by the boss of racial or ethnic divisions to, take advantage of the workforce, because that definitely comes up, and you call it out and organize against it. And then otherwise, just in terms of unifying people and educating, each other and joining together in the labor movement, I think, yeah, like joining together in common struggle around common goals, is the best way to unify people. And that, making sure that you have, representation, that you're, engaging with all the different parts of the workforce as you're doing so, is key to build a really strong union and working class movement. So, yeah.
Thank you both. Okay, we have one more question before we'll sum up. I'm gonna throw this to Chris. So there's a question about what specific forms of strike support people can use and maybe which ones are most effective. Like, should people be going for mainly bringing food to the picket line or fundraising for a solidarity campaign or a solidarity fund, or, what are the different ways that a chapter can support and which ones are most important?
I would say, as always, the best, most important thing that you can do is ask the workers and talk to the workers about what their needs are. If they are confident, if they have a strong relationship with union leadership and they're directing folks to the strike fund, then boosting the strike fund is great. If you're able to be there in person and make connections with the workers and make it clear that if you're building relationships with the workers, then I think that's the most important thing of all. For us in Birmingham, because we, for a couple of reasons, weren't able to participate on the picket line as much. So we weren't able to make quite as many direct connections with workers at first. We wanted to make it clear that our support, we wanted to collect as much support through our DSA network as we could, and and give that financial donation support to to the UMWA workers, and make it clear that it's DSA that's organizing that effort. And so in that regard, we wanted to make sure that we were doing something that it was like a solidarity fund that we were putting together, that had DSA's name on it. It was DSA for the mine workers. And doing that, we were able to sort of, I think, pull more support from our DSA networks, because it was, hey, we're DSA down here, we're supporting the workers here. So in that regard, that was a choice that we made that I think ended up allowing us to get more donations and build a stronger profile for that support. But during the, for us during the fall, it wasn't necessarily that the workers needed like financial donations as much as like everyone wanted to make sure that Christmas was going to happen. And so, there are times I think when it makes sense to shift your strategy, and sometimes also, maybe the workers, if you ask somebody who's on strike, what is it that you need? Maybe they'll tell you, and sometimes it would be helpful for you to propose something. Like, hey, would it be great if we came around here with, if we came around with food on this day, or like, do you guys have any events coming up, or what's going on in your life? For example, there's an Easter egg hunt that's being organized for the mine work. A lot of the mine workers on strike down here have kids, and so they have like an Easter egg hunt coming up. That's not necessarily like material strike support, but like showing up and helping hide eggs and do that stuff. Obviously that's stuff that we've kind of built up a little bit more of a relationship. Little things like that can also be part of your strike support effort. And so it really comes down to just trying to build as strong a relationship and a listening relationship with the workers as you can, and doing whatever your chapter has the capacity to do.
Great. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. Okay, I'm going to summarize and wrap it up. So we are here because we are launching the rank and file strategy pamphlet. You've heard so much about it from our panelists. We heard about from Paul the connection of workplace struggles to electoral campaigns and building our base of working class people who can test for power, who can contest for power in the state. We heard about Dalia's exciting choice to become a midwife and encourage fellow YDSA members to get jobs in strategic sectors and commit to the labor movement for the long haul. We heard about the jobs pipeline in Chicago and how Teamsters are reforming their union in the labor movement. We heard about Birmingham doing community support for workplace struggles, doing education across DSA chapters in the South, and building up their own DSA chapter through strike support. And we heard about strategic industries and why it's so important to cluster DSA members where possible, because we are limited in members at this moment, and how winning shop floor organizing can build class consciousness. So the rank and file strategy in practice has many tactics. You can read more about that in the pamphlet. And it's our role as socialist organizers to collapse the existing gap between the working class at large and the socialist movement. And we do that by being present as organizers in the workplace, having an important role in important unions and in strategic workplaces, by connecting the wider community to the labor struggles that exist, whether that be a campaign for strike or for an election, and using DSA as a place of recruitment for people to get strategic jobs, or using our impact on the shop floor as a place of recruitment for people to join the socialist movement, because the socialist movement needs class warriors. So order the rank and file strategy pamphlet now. If you go to rfs.dsausa.org, you can order physical copies of the pamphlet. If you are a chapter, so individuals can't order, but chapters can order, I think in groups of 10 pamphlets, not only 10, but in units of 10, and or you can read the digital pamphlet on our website. So let's open up the chat, because I have a question for all of our audience members before you leave. My question to you is, what are you going to do with the rank and file strategy pamphlet? Are you going to order a bunch of copies for maybe a labor network that you're in an industry that you're forming in your chapter? Are you going to maybe show it to all the people in your labor committee and have them read it and do a political education on it? Are you going to show it to your coworker and talk about your politics? So tell me right now in the chat, what are you going to do with the rank and file strategy pamphlet, either the digital version or the printed version? Let us know what you're going to do with it. Yes, we're going to read it. We're going to bring copies to our fellow coworkers and fellow stewards. We're going to share with members of our chapter, read it in groups. Yes, we're going to have it for when we table, have reading groups, discussion groups, people who show up to maybe member events and are really interested in rank and file strategy and labor organizing. And we're going to put it into practice. I love that someone said that. Yes, we're going to read it and then we're going to do it. I love it. Oh my God, you're going to bring copies to Labor Notes. Hell yes, that's right. So don't forget, Labor Notes Conference is in June. It's the 17th, 18th, and 19th. So much of the important skills and concepts that we need to make the rank and file strategy possible, we learn through the amazing educational resources at Labor Notes. So definitely consider going. There's funding for people who can't afford it. Check it out, labornotes.org. And thank you all so much for being with us today. Go out there, share the rank and file strategy with your friends, comrades, and coworkers, and let's win socialism. Thank you, everyone. Solidarity forever.